I wouldn't say that, but no, I wouldn't start it right now. I think that's unnecessary.
Thank you, Casey.
Can't see her. Oh, nice. There's someone very stealthy in the background now.
Is that your dog?
I see. You can sit up.
I see.
He's camouflaged in
You
the
are
couch.
camouflaged, puppy dog.
That's
Oh,
awesome.
that's so cute.
Oh,
Here, we'll, doesn't help. She is really camouflaged. You have to have your handy lights for when you teach all day so that you can adjust your backlights and get your...
oh my God.
oh yeah, no, you have to have the full deal for daytime, nighttime teaching.
You like shine that on your face when you're having to do classes at night?
Well, for that CNN thing, we needed to have...
You know, that's so funny because I noticed when you were doing the CNN thing that it looked like you had this like spotlight on you. And I was like, where is he?
That was it.
Oh,
But I'm going to add a little more backlight now that I switched sides to this.
all right. And so to folks who are joining us early, welcome and thank you so much. We are going to get started in just a few minutes. And I'm going to actually invite everybody who has joined us who's not on camera when we're going to have an opportunity later in this forum for breakout sessions, and it's going to be really, really, really helpful if you can be on camera. So if you have that capability, please enable it sometime soon. And then the other thing I'm going to ask you to do is to, in the chat, put who your name and where you're calling in from, because I know we have people from all over the state, and maybe your affiliation if you have one. And I am gonna pop up. It's so exciting to see all these faces, and some of you I know and haven't seen in a long time. And
Totally, Vanessa.
hi, Jane.
Hi. And I'm eating yogurt while we're doing this. If that's right?
Oh my God! And someone named D is getting an ear rub. Nice.
Oh, which I wear. Is there anyone else getting a message at the top that says leave meeting, can't connect to our service? Please check your network connection, try again. And yet I can hear you and see you fine.
So peculiar.
Yeah.
No.
It's weird. I mean, I see Vanessa. I'm Karen.
I see you just fine too.
I see
Mysteries
Glenn.
of Zoom.
It's what? I'll just ignore it and hope I won't get cut out.
Okay, just put it on the counter so I know where to clean it.
Weird. Okay.
All right, so as folks are joining us, if you could put your, let me see if I can get my chat to. And you guys don't, so Casey, you don't see my chat or my screen. All you see is the slide presentation. Is that right?
When you hit play, yes, that's correct. But right now also, yeah.
All right, so all you see is the slides?
Yep.
Perfect, okay.
I'm Karen. I see you. I don't see slides though.
You don't see a slide?
The only thing I see is that
the climate crisis?
COVID, the climate crisis, yes, but then there's this big box in the middle that says leave meeting.
Oh.
Yeah, so I can't, I mean, missing up.
So you know what you might want to do, since we have a couple of minutes, you might want to log off and then join back in, but I would do it super quick because, did you register?
Yeah.
Then you'll have a link. We are a little oversubscribed, but I think we'll probably be fine, but I would do it right now before 4:30.
Okay, I'll click on leave meeting and then I'll hopefully come back.
Okay. I have a management. So we have, so far we have 51 people online. That's super exciting.
Are you going to do your meeting here?
No, I'm moving.
And then the other thing that I need to know, mute all. I'm going to mute everybody. Okay, so you should now all be muted. Good.
And for people who are just joining, please feel free to put your name and where you're from in the chat.
Hi,
Awesome.
this is Robert Joe. I can hear you and see about 4 of you right now on my right-hand side, but I'm going to switch over to my Toshiba, and I believe there's a camera there, and maybe I'll be visible.
Great, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Casey, can you still see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. I just got a scary, weird thing from Zoom saying I was signed in somewhere else, but I'm gonna.
We're taxing Zoom to its limit.
All right, so folks are just joining. We've got 95 people now, and I know 96, 97. This is fantastic. Just as people file in, I'm hoping that you could introduce yourself in the chat. Just put your name and where you're calling in from. And if you have an affiliation, put that as well, just so people get a sense of all the different people who are joining us. I see we've got...
Vanessa, not everybody knows where chat is. This is Jane.
Oh, well, on mine it might be different. You should have a little thing down at the bottom that says chat with a little
Yeah,
bubble.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Sorry, I'll mute myself again.
That's okay. Thanks for the reminder. Fantastic. People from Danville and Oakland and Berkeley. And oops, and I cannot do anything on my computer without getting my slides to go. So it's 4:30. I'm going to just move to the next slide and give you all a sense of what we're going to be doing. We're going to have a quick just housekeeping, let people continue to file in. We've got 118 people now online, and we had over 300 people register, so I'm expecting more people to be filing in over the next few minutes. I'm going to give you kind of an overview of Fossil Free California, our campaigns and our community, and how the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic is affecting the work that we do, and just sort of the beginnings of that conversation that we're starting to have. Then we're really lucky to have Professor Dan KAMMEN with us today, who's going to be talking about the crisis and the opportunities of these sort of twin crises, climate and COVID-19. We're then going to have an opportunity to have a breakouts where, as Sandy says, we're really pushing Zoom to its limits, but we are going to be breaking everybody on the call into groups of 5 or 6 so that you can talk to each other. You're all muted right now, and so it's not chaotic, but then you're going to have an opportunity after Dan's presentation to really have about 15 minutes to really dive in and connect with each other. Part of what we want to offer here is a space in which people can connect when we're all isolated. Then we're going to come back from those breakouts. There'll be an opportunity for some, maybe not all, but folks to report back from anything that came bubbling up out of those discussions. We're going to have a Q&A with Dan. There will be an opportunity all throughout his presentation to put any questions you have for him in the chat. Also, during your discussions, if you have questions for him, you can indicate those in the report box, put them in the chat. And Casey Loosbrock, who's our volunteer manager, is going to be taking those questions and giving them to Dan, and he's going to be responding. And then at the end, Casey's going to give us just a brief rundown of all the various ways you all can plug into what we're doing here. And then we'll say goodbye and leave you with thoughts for where we go from here. So while we wait for a couple more folks to join, I'll just pop this up on the screen. And. And let's get started. So first, let me introduce myself. My name is Vanessa Warheit. I am the Executive Director of Fossil Free California. We are a statewide nonprofit. We're largely volunteer run, and we are focused on moving money out of fossil fuels and into a just transition to a clean energy economy. We have 3 active campaigns right now. We have what we call Move Your Money, which is focused on individuals and organizations moving their banking and investing towards climate solutions and out of fossil fuels. We have also 2 campaigns focused on the largest pension funds, public pension funds in the country, CalPERS, the Public Employee Retirement System, and CalSTRS, the State Teacher Retirement System. There are some numbers here. 400 billion was the top earlier this year. It's now significantly lost, as have everybody in the market. The most recent number we had for CalSTRS was 243 billion, but we know that they've incurred significant losses as well. We're going to talk a little bit more about those losses in a bit. And our CalSTRS campaign in particular has been really, we've had a lot of momentum of the past year by joining forces with the youth movement, in particular 3 groups: Earth Guardians, the Sunrise Movement, and Youth versus Apocalypse. And that momentum has translated into many different things. I'm going to show you a short clip here from one of the first meetings where the youth joined us at CalSTRS. They've been coming with us for the past year now to the investment committee meetings in West Sacramento. They've committed to having a presence at every meeting until the fund divests. And it's a natural alliance because they, you know, if there's one thing students know, it's their teachers. And so when they learned that their teachers' investments for retirement were going into the fossil fuel industry, they really stepped up. So I'll just push play.
Does everybody have sound?
I don't.
Oh,
No,
There was no sound.
Oh,
Vanessa, there's been no sound from the beginning. This is Jane.
Investing from fossil fuels
hear
will
that?
save our planets and millions.
Yes.
well, we didn't test that part and we should have. I apologize, everybody. I'm going to keep going because I don't want to take up time from
no
but
problem.
we
No
have
problem.
a lot more of those on our website, and at least you got a tiny bit of his voice.
And our YouTube channel.
On our YouTube channel. Head over there anytime. We've got lots of them. And I just want to point out something too. You noted in the opening credits that it said that his video was not entered into the public record. The CalSTRS has been citing privacy issues, and the board has refused to include any of the youth testimony in the public record, regardless of parental consent, which has led them to then have protests with censored tape over their mouths and a lot of other stuff that you might see when you see pictures of what they've been doing. So anyway, that's a big campaign that we're currently involved in. Let me, sorry. Uh-oh. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So another campaign that we're, in addition to sort of our own 3 campaigns, we're also involved in the Last Chance Alliance. It's an environmental justice campaign focused on Governor Newsom. It's really focused on community health with a racial and economic equity lens. And the asks are to the governor to stop all new oil and gas drilling leases in California, to drop production of oil and gas extraction from existing leases in California, and to roll out 2,500-foot setbacks between oil and gas drilling and what we consider sensitive areas like schools and preschools and daycare centers and homes and hospitals, and particularly places where children are, but children and families and communities. So that's one campaign that we're also very heavily involved in. We're also part of something called Stop the Money Pipeline. It began as an initiative of Bill McKibben's last year, and it's focused nationwide on climate finance, again, with a racial and economic equity lens, targeting banks, managers, and pension funds. And so we are a big part of that pension fund part of that coalition. And I should also add, we're in the process of creating a directed network that will connect our two pension campaigns, divestment campaigns, with divestment campaigns at other pension funds across North America. Something we're really heavily engaged in right now and super excited about. So this year is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, and before the pandemic, climate groups around the world had been focused on celebrating this anniversary with mass protests in the streets. This has all now obviously moved online. Right now, the plan is to create a 72-hour live stream event. The first day will still be focused on youth and indigenous action. The second day will be focused on finance, and the third day focused on getting out the vote. So we are very heavily involved in that second day, April 23rd. There's a bit.ly here. If you go to bit.ly/April23-signup, that is how you can let us know that you want to get involved. We have a team currently working on what we are going to be proposing to do on the 23rd. If you, there's a tick box on that sign up form if you would like to be part of the, like, deciding. There's so many opportunities for creative action. This is just one of them that our friend David Solnit has put together that we're considering doing. But anyway, we have lots of ideas. And so please join us for that online, safe from the comfort of your own home, Global Day of Action on April 23rd. So all of this gives you just sort of an overview of who we are, a taste of the challenges that the movement is facing as we come to terms with the coronavirus pandemic. Since here at Fossil Free California, we focus on climate finance, I just want to share a little bit of information about the markets and what they're doing. As we have been telling the funds over and over again, and anyone who will listen, fossil fuels are a terrible investment. This is only from the last year. This graph represents if you had invested $10,000 last April in the energy sector, represented by this ETF that represents all the sort of big oil companies, and you'd invested that same amount of money in the S&P 500, what it would bring you today. You would have lost about $400 in the S&P, you would have lost over $6,000 in the oil and gas sector. So it's also important to know this is a long-term trend. The S&P has actually been outperforming the energy sector for the last 6 years now. And the fossil fuel industry's underlying weaknesses are what has really spectacularly failed the stress test of the pandemic and the price war going on with the Saudis and the Russians. So you're going to hear more from Professor KAMMEN about the role of subsidies in keeping this industry afloat. But it's just important to know how much of the current market losses are actually being borne by the fossil fuel industry. And I just want to add, you know, we've been saying that this kind of a collapse would happen for a long time, but it really, in some ways, it really brings us no joy to show this slide today, knowing that workers in this industry are suffering and that they still need to be supported to transition to cleaner, safer, family-sustaining jobs. That work has not been done. It needs to be done. So the money needs to move out of this toxic, failing industry and into that clean transition. And that work still needs to be done. And it's also not a happy thought to know that our pensions have not yet heeded our call. The UC has, and Professor KAMMEN is going to talk about that. But the public pensions have not. And so the retirement savings of our teachers and public employees are suffering because of what we're seeing in this graph. So it's kind of scary out there right now. I want to just name that. I want to share these sweet, hilarious slides from The Guardian that Cynthia from our CalSTRS team shared with me. I've personally been delivering groceries for my neighbor. She's always got a couple of bottles of wine on the list. I found this particularly cheering. And I just want to remind everyone, the most important thing we can do in this moment is to take care of each other. What we have right now, what the biggest strength we have right now is our solidarity. I believe that to my very core. So before we dive into Professor KAMMEN's presentation, I just want to share a couple of other resources with you. This is a group in Canada called below2c.org. There's a link here, and I just want to say we're recording this presentation. We're going to share the recording, so if you don't get to write everything down, don't sweat it. We're going to send an email out with a link to the recording afterwards. But this presentation was from up in Canada. It was last week with a bunch of doctors talking with climate activists about how to think about these twin crises and how to prioritize health right now and how to link them. So I strongly recommend listening to this. I also wanted to give a shout out to Naomi Klein, who on The Intercept last week published this short video. Again, there's a link down at the bottom, called Coronavirus Capitalism. And in it, she quotes Milton Friedman, saying that only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. This occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. And luckily, a lot of the work that's happened over the last year or two has resulted in some really good ideas flying around. So one of the things that we're going to be hearing about is the Green New Deal and what it can mean in terms of a stimulus package. And I just want to leave you with this quote from Naomi Klein. She says, "Shocks and crises don't always go the shock doctrine path. It's possible for a crisis to catalyze a kind of evolutionary leap." And so when I think about that, that's what gives me hope. So before we dive in to Professor KAMMEN's presentation, I just want to also leave you, we're going to come back to this slide at the end. There are 1,000 ways you can help plug in to the climate movement, as well as helping with things like making masks and supporting your neighbors. This is a quick list of what you can do to work with us. And like I said earlier, Casey is going to be coming in at the end with more specifics about what all of these opportunities look like. So without further ado, and I'm actually on time, which makes me very excited. Professor Dan KAMMEN has a very long CV, but this gives you a little bit of highlight of what he is up to currently at UC Berkeley, where he runs several important centers. I will also add that in April of 2010, he was appointed by then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton as the first Energy Fellow of the Environment and Climate Partnership for the Americas Initiative. And in 2016, he began service as the Science Envoy for US Secretary of State John Kerry, but then resigned over President Trump's policies in August of 2017. So he's a key example of the great minds that are unfortunately not guiding the country at the moment from Washington, D.C., but we're lucky enough to have him here with us. Professor KAMMEN has also served the state of California and US federal government in expert and advisory capacities, including time at the US EPA, the US Department of Energy, the Agency for International Development, also known as USAID, and the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And so if you have questions while Dan is presenting, again, I want to encourage you, please put those in the chat. Casey will be collecting them. And without further ado, I'm delighted to stop sharing and introduce Professor Dan KAMMEN.
I want to thank you all for being on. I see a lot of friends. I really appreciate the chance to talk with you all. And I'm excited by the level of interest and activity in what really has become this pair of crises. And so what I'll try to quickly go through, really just to highlight and trigger some interesting parts of the conversation, both the breakout groups and the Q&A, are both some of the similarities between the climate crisis and the COVID crisis, and some of the opportunities that are emerging to actually make some really interesting and important steps forward. I list the website of my laboratory here. It's called Renewable and Appropriate Energy Laboratory, RAIL. And I will put the slides from this talk on it as soon as we're done, or maybe 30 minutes afterwards. And then the Twitter at the bottom, we tweet a couple times a day about things going on in the space, and that'll come up later on. But in terms of being an academic, being a scientist, but also working on policy, hopefully that has a real useful synergy to the type of really critical efforts that you've all been involved with Fossil Free California. Just a snapshot of the people in my laboratory, kind of it shows some of the interesting places they go, both in terms of the types of jobs, academic and otherwise. And this is really the resource base that everything I'll talk about draws on. Each one of them has gone on to do remarkable things. And we closely work together on everything from very small scale individual technologies to really large policy. And hopefully in the next few minutes, I'll be able to highlight some of those things for you. So this op-ed I wrote in 2013, it did not get a lot of positive response beyond what you would expect to be the usual suspects who were interested. A number of people from my colleagues at UC Berkeley to the financial managers for the UC system did not show a lot of love for the idea that we should divest because we were hurting the planet. And in a state that's decarbonizing its electricity, my argument in this op-ed was if you don't decarbonize your money, you're really cheating and you're really not doing the planet or ourselves any service. The nice version of the story, although you have to look back, this is 2013, is that this past year we had a real rousing success in the UC system. We got the financial office to agree to divest. The faculty voted overwhelmingly, not entirely. I was surprised there were even 83 no votes, but we got a resounding vote from the faculties at Berkeley and at all the other campuses to divest. And the battle that we did on the UC system is now playing out elsewhere at Harvard and other schools. And so it's really critical both to recognize that these things can get a pretty ugly response in the beginning, but ultimately they change over, and also it recognizes that you have to stick with it. 2013 to today is a long run in this process. In terms of that resignation that you mentioned before, one of the benefits of working on the science of climate is that if you hopefully do a reasonable job, you get to work both at the state level and federally. And so under President Obama, I did have this role of science envoy, and there's a number of us with Secretary Kerry, and then with President Obama. And of course, we had this sort of transition in government. You had a nice letter from President Obama, but then we had this transition to Mr. Trump and got this situation where it was not possible to stay in this role fighting for climate with an administration that doesn't believe the science. So I did resign. I did write a letter of resignation as is required, but I did, of course, put a message into it. And the first question that I got back from most of the reporters was this intentional? So I was a little surprised at that, but I did know that if you want to talk to this president, you have to tweet. So I did write the letter, I did embed my message, my acrostic, and I did then ask the best known person I knew if she would retweet it for me. And thankfully she agreed. She retweeted it, and by the end of the first day, it had definitely generated a lot of discussion. And I say this not because it's fun to resign from things. I actually really hated to have to step down, but it highlights the work that you're doing, and that is there's a role for science, a role for economics, and there's a role for public activism. And in my experience, the campaigns that have worked the best in terms of getting rid of fossil fuels or fighting for environmental justice has been when all of those have worked together, when there's been a research base, when there's been an activist community, and there's been people willing to step out and to really act on the lessons that come from that. And we're seeing that in the COVID debate today. And I would say that of all of the horrible things about COVID, there are a series of pretty interesting and positive messages if, as Naomi Klein says, we actually take advantage of what we learned. So the first thing, very clear, is that if you're not prepared, as we saw this president was not prepared, if you don't invest in medical treatment, if you don't invest in respirators and thermometers, et cetera, there's just no substitute for preparation. You don't learn new things and do them in a crisis unless you prepped. South Korea prepped. Singapore prepped. We did not. The second thing we're learning, from toilet paper to in Berkeley, there's currently a shortage of tofu, is that our supply chains are vulnerable. And we have to understand that while COVID is horrific, climate change will make these supply chains even more vulnerable and even more damageable. And so if we learn anything from COVID, it's that we have to prepare now. The other thing is that tipping points happen fast. And while the COVID crisis went from a few cases in Washington state to a nationwide epidemic, climate, which we think of as a slow-moving process, will generate bigger changes in housing stock, the 10,000 homes that burned in California, changes in food supplies, changes in ocean systems. So we need to recognize that COVID is teaching us lessons about climate that we need to learn from. The other feature is that individual actions really matter. There's been this debate whether we should just attack fossil fuel companies, which we should, and individual actions, recycling, don't matter. We know scientifically and from the behavioral economics that individual actions not only matter because they add up, but that's where we learn. And we learn as individuals, as CEOs, as teachers. And so if we don't practice what we preach, we don't learn the lessons, and we don't teach others those things that are workable. The most likely family to have solar on their roof is a family that can see solar on someone else's roof. We know that academically, we know that analytically, so our actions matter. The last one is the hardest, and that is that environmental justice has to be central. That's what Naomi Klein's book was about. What we know very clearly is that our society is only as resilient as the least protected, because in the COVID case, reinfection can come from communities we're ignoring. We haven't even begun to talk about COVID in the homeless communities yet. We haven't begun to talk about it in communities that are that don't have legal status, DACA communities. So if we don't think of this as we're all in it together, we'll just spend money to insulate the rich, and that will not solve either COVID or climate. And of course, one of my favorite posters is the one that comes up in every disaster movie, and someone's ignoring a scientist. And as a scientist, this is one of the biggest challenges for us. When we look at the COVID data, we see these horrific numbers. We've all seen the doubling rates in the world. The United States is trying to put the global doubling rate for COVID to shame by doubling our rates faster. We are currently the source of most of the COVID infections worldwide. When you look at a map that they show on CNN or anything every day, you see this data over and over again of how bad it is here. And in a bit of a nerdy version of this, and for those who aren't used to thinking about log or plots in decades, like the Richter scale, just take a look. This was a graph made only 3 weeks ago when there was about 2,000 cases in the United States. That's the dashed line across the middle. Today, we are 3 weeks later, and we're at 160,000 cases. And what this shows you is, with that massive increase in cases, even groups that looked small back then, weddings, dinner parties, now have a significant risk. And one of the things that we're seeing in the debate over the stimulus package is an argument about how soon we should relax. We should go back to business as normal. If you think that story is worrying for COVID, where the president just relented on this Easter, then climate is much worse for reasons I'll get to, because it is a decade-long fight. And so this kind of technical picture really puts those numbers in some perspective. And of course, when I say we have to prepare, if you look at how much of our scientific elite in the federal government is simply absent under this administration, this means that no matter how good a job the people there are doing, those 44 people who are there, it simply is not the same as having an administration which actually takes the science seriously and ramps up. And that's one of the huge worries in this process. In fact, if you look at the unemployment projections, you can see this graph that bounces along with these recessions. And then some of these forecasts for what might happen under COVID are truly horrific in terms of thinking about 20% or more in, unemployment rates. Well, you've all seen this curve before. This, of course, is the climate curve, where we've seen a relatively steady level of CO2 in the atmosphere and then this shooting up. And so this idea that we are replaying this horrific climate story, this COVID climate back and forth, is really a key part of the story. The science, which I won't dwell on, not only highlights that a 3-degree pathway puts almost everyone in exposure for heat waves, water stress. The 2-degree path that we were arguing for Paris drops those numbers somewhat. And of course, this is the treaty that we largely wrote and that President Trump walked away from. And that the new target of 1.5 degrees, you can see, dramatically drops these risks, but they're not zero. But this is what we need to do. Just like for COVID, we need to inoculate ourselves against climate. And while we know the science is there, we know we can get off this 4.5 degree warming of the planet pathway. Paris would have gotten us down to 2 degrees, but we know we have to go even further. But it's a mixture of science, new technology, behavior, and investment. And that's why what you're doing with fossil-free California is so critical, because ultimately the lesson we have to get to is we have to invest in pathways that get us below 2 degrees. That 1.5 degree one is scientifically the guardrail we need to have. One other way to think about that is that this gray line shows the increase we've been seeing, but as we delay our dramatic action on climate, we push past the peak, and not only does the peak get taller, we emit more, but more worrying to me as a scientist is that the slope of these lines gets steeper and steeper. The more we wait and get closer to the red line, we have to not only deal with a climate crisis for weeks and months, but decades. The earlier we start, the earlier we invest, the earlier we move our money from dirty to clean, we allow us to think more like this blue pathway, which is a lot more relaxed. It's a lot easier to get on. It allows us to not make this an emergency every single day for 30 years. And there's probably no one I can thank more than Greta Thunberg, who demonstrates that individual actions matter. This was her climate strike only 2 years ago. And now every Friday, from Berkeley campus to Berlin, to New York City to elsewhere, we have a weekly climate strike. So unlike Woodstock, where the number of people who said they were there is quite a bit more than those who were actually there, this is a strike you can't miss, because every Friday there is a strike. Now, it's sad to me that this is taken very seriously in Europe, and it's taken very seriously every few weeks in the United States, but everyone can help organize this just like Greta did in terms of pushing forward. And I want to highlight why it's so critical to move those investment dollars. This is a map of the least cost energy technologies across the United States if we invested the money today. The purple is solar, the rust color orange is natural gas, the green is wind. There's a little pocket of nuclear in Wisconsin, and this is with today's economics, no subsidy. In the New England states, they have the RGGI coalition. They have a very low price for carbon, $6 a ton. The map doesn't change much when I go from 0 to 6, but it changes a little bit. In California, our price on carbon is $20 a ton, and the map changes quite a bit more. But every expert recognizes that the market price of carbon is a fraction of what its overall damage to us is in terms of health and ecological issues, and yes, the causes of things like COVID, where we're deforesting landscapes. If I put in that social cost of carbon, $50 a ton, the map really transforms. The entire country is essentially best powered at least cost by solar in purple and wind with a little bit of nuclear and then a tiny bit of natural gas at lowest cost. And that's why the fossil fuel free campaign is so vital, because representing these costs allows companies and governments, CalPERS and CalSTRS and others, to make the switch. The good part of the story is that you've all been part of the effort that took California from a 20% clean energy requirement by 2010, something we missed. We made it in 2013, not in 2010. We have a target for 2020 of 1/3. We're already well above that. We met our 2020 target early despite meeting our 2010 target late. Our target for 2030 was 50% until we passed Senate Bill 100 last year that calls us to go to 100% clean energy in 2045. And as part of that, our target for 2030 went up to 60%. Now, California has the most stringent clean energy target nationwide. Our definition is solar, wind, geothermal, bioenergy, if it's sustainable, and ocean energy. We don't count large hydro. We don't count nuclear. Those are both topics that we debate around the world, but California has a pathway to get there. And the actions and the places where companies can invest the money they're pulling from fossil fuels with your help are things like this. We started 7 years ago to change the rules so that every new home built in California after 2020 has to have solar, or has to generate as much energy as it consumes, generally with solar. So it's a mixture of efficiency and solar rooftops. And that's already in place. That was rules started in January. We also said that by 2030, our office buildings have to also be carbon neutral. And we don't know how to do that yet. But Governor Schwarzenegger was willing to sign it based on continuing to invest in new research on energy storage, smart windows, et cetera. And I highlight that because that builds a climate resilient landscape. But what it doesn't do is the second part of the story. And that is, we're not going to get there if we don't find a way to make this a just transition. And so on that same website I showed you before of my laboratory, Rail Berkeley EDU, you'll find we're having an event next week. It's actually next Tuesday, right at the same time. It is a nationwide event called Solve Climate by 2030. It's a series of webinars. Everyone in California is welcome to join, and the registration instructions are on that website that I highlighted for you. What we're going to talk about there are more details of the Green New Deal. And a group of us on Monday, last Monday, released a green stimulus plan, which is making the rounds on Capitol Hill to come after this $2 trillion COVID stimulus as a way to invest in the things that make the difference between not just going green, but making it a Green New Deal for all. And an example of this in California, of course, is making housing options affordable, not just for the rich, but for the poor in low-income settings. So doing everything from rent-controlled housing near transit stops to finding ways to subsidize not just mortgages, but also rents if the buildings have solar, have energy storage. And all of these are really part of investing in our most vulnerable, just like the COVID case. One quick example is that we have a project in Oakland called the Eco Block, and I see some of the partners in that are on the line here. And the idea of the Eco Block is that while more affluent Californians can buy solar or storage, lower income communities have other opportunities. So in this case, the Eco Block is 40 homes in a low income section of Oakland, where yes, there will be solar on all the roofs like you see here, but the solar will all be stored in a battery in that utility garage across the street that will then go back to power all the homes, as well as powering EV charging. And I highlight this because it's a way that we can find to work beyond our own home and essentially work as a neighborhood so that solar will not just be for the rich. The last point I want to mention is that while solar has done great things for California, it will certainly be the biggest source of power in the coming years. the way we provide solar now through subsidies or for those people who own a home and can put it on their own roof is a challenge, because for most of our low-income citizens, they don't own their roof. So in a project with Google that has taken aerial maps of all rooftops to look for solar, what we've done is to look who has solar and who doesn't. And I won't get into the numbers here, they're on the website, but the story is truly sad. California has most of the solar in the country, but neighborhoods that are majority white have far more solar, 30 to 40% more than communities that are majority Latino, and 70% more than African American. And this is exactly one of the areas where a green stimulus, a Green New Deal, is focusing effort. And in Naomi Klein's writings, in the document around stimulus that we've highlighted here, we've demonstrated many of the mechanisms that California and other states could use, such as making solar available for renters by incentivizing landlords to install solar, but then requiring them to pass on the savings to the people in their buildings. The last thing I want to say before we move into the discussion part of the story here is that one of the most interesting ways to look at this is to start and map out where do we see our carbon being used in our own personal lives. And so this website, coolclimate.berkeley.edu, you can download it as an app for your phone. It will allow you to take a carbon footprint assessment of your own life. Are you a vegetarian? Are you a vegan? Are you a vampire? Do you walk to work? Do you drive to work? And really look at your footprint. And just to show you some of the maps, this is the electricity used across the country by zip code. This is natural gas across the country. Carbon dioxide emissions from the goods and the services that we buy, and from the food that we consume. You can see the areas where we have very carbon intensive food in California's Central Valley, in the big crop circle areas in the Southwest. And when we look at that carbon footprint by zip code, we start to get a picture of what we're doing. And everyone who looks at this, the first thing they do is they go compare their neighbor to themselves. And you can really get a detailed view of whose carbon footprint is low or high. This highlights how important individual action is, but also how if we don't understand the ecosystem of our cities, the power of divesting from fossil fuels in our portfolios and reinvesting in clean energy, it won't get us somewhere. My favorite page, and the slide I'll end on, is this. This is what we call the take action page. After you've done your carbon footprint, the calculator will show you the next set of activities that you haven't done. And in this case, you can see an individual has clicked off 3 of them they've committed to do. We'll send you a reminder every few months if you want or not. But this will tell you the next things that would help out in your carbon footprint. And it'll also show you how much carbon you'll save, but also how much money you'll save by making this transition. And I highlight this because it really shows me how clearly individual actions matter, but that educating our elected officials, educating leaders of companies and industry is really the critical part of that story, so that we can understand how much more powerful we will be if our portfolios decarbonize, not just our individual actions. And so I want to stop there. I want to highlight how important all of these tools are, but the most important tool is what you're doing here. Participating in discussions, airing different views, really asking hard questions about both the science and the economics and the behavior. All of that really gets us to a place where we can absolutely take action on climate. So again, I want to thank you. I look forward to the breakout groups.
Wait, hold on,
and
let
then
me
to our
turn off my
discussion.
computer. There. Oh, I was wondering that, like today you're ending your quarantine, right? Oh, where's the dog? At your friend's
Sorry, I'm
house.
gonna try to mute everybody.
That's me,
again.
sorry.
Okay.
Oh, was that you?
Um,
No.
well, that's great news. And how's your friend doing?
I don't think that's you. Let me hold on. I'm trying to bear with me, everybody. I'm trying to remember how to mute everybody. Mute all. Continue. Okay. Thank you, Dan. That was amazing. And my head is spinning. And we have captured some questions. Thank you for those of you who have popped questions and comments into the chat. Casey is capturing those. And what we would like to do now is I'm going to make Sandy a co-host so that she can start. She's going to break all of us up into groups of 5 or 6. Let me see here. Let me find you, Sandy. I'm not finding you. Hold on. That's going to be about 15 minutes. And what that's going to do is allow us to unmute and to check in and talk to each other. And I'm going to share my screen with you, which has standby, which is going to have some prompts for us to, I'm trying to do 3 things at once here. Stand by just a second. Let me get Sandy up first. Once I get Sandy up online, I'm going to post a slide that shows you what the discussion prompts are. So Sandy is, where did she go? I wish there was a way to like sort people. Sandy, if you hear me, can you?
I'm right at the top, all lowercase. I'm a co-host.
At the top of
And-
yours, but not at the top. Are
Well,
you co-hosting?
yeah.
Okay, good. So are you gonna, do I need to do anything else to make you able to divide us up?
Yes, you need to, let's see.
I'm gonna get this slide up while we're figuring that out.
Hello.
All right, so while Sandy is figuring that out, here's what we are hoping you guys can do once you get into your breakout sessions. And I'm gonna ask Casey. Casey, can you paste or type all of these prompts into the chat? Oops, sorry. Casey, can you do that?
Yes.
Great. I'm going to ask folks to not join their breakout rooms yet, because you need to get the prompts in your chat, because once you leave and go to the breakout room, you won't, the chat won't follow you.
They're
So
in
if
the
you-
chat now, so.
They're all in the chat? Okay, great. And let me just give you a quick verbal prompt. Basically, if you can do one turnaround where you introduce yourselves, then another turnaround where you just listen to each other finishing those prompts I'm most concerned about today, I'm most hopeful about. You can do that in 1 or 2 turns. And then once you've had a chance to really kind of at least get to know each other a little bit, then go through these prompts to talk about what it was about the content that maybe piqued your interest, what it might make you want to do, because we're very mindful of like action is the antidote to despair. So what is it that you feel really moved to do today? Any thoughts that you have about additional thoughts about how this crisis helps us to address the climate crisis? And then also if you have any specific questions for Dr. Kammen that you didn't get to post in the chat, we'd like to capture those afterwards too. All right, now please join the breakout rooms, and you have 15 minutes. We'll see you back here a little after 5:30. And I should say, we may drop in on your rooms. Don't be surprised if you see us drop in. And for those of you who are on audio only, I'm going to unmute you if I can. Participants. Actually, I'm going to have to ask Sandy. I can't do it. Sandy, can you unmute? Here, I can do it. Well, if those of you who are on audio only can hear me, once Sandy gets herself, once she's gotten herself sorted, I'm going to ask her to unmute you so that we can just talk amongst ourselves on audio. It might take a moment. Actually, what I think I'm going to do might be better. Is ask you if you can hear me, if indicate here in the chat if you'd like to talk over audio only.
Yourself over here.
But then they can't hear this. I want to read it to them.
Yeah, no. So go to the other room and ask them to screen share, or you can screen share. Whoever has the questions in a document.
Yeah, I think that Vanessa does. Hello,
Yeah.
Vanessa, can you hear me?
I can. Who is this?
This is Venona. I'm one of the participants. I'm in breakout room 7.
Okay.
And, I'm in the other people in my room. We're not sure where to go with the questions because we can't see the questions at the same time. So is there a way for you to share this question screen with?
if you look in the chat, if you look in your group chat,
Uh-huh.
do you see, they should be in the group chat.
The other people are, but are the questions there as well?
Yeah,
Oh,
so
okay.
in your group chat, it should say from Casey at 5:17. There's a list of prompts. Do you see
Oh,
those?
okay. Well, I have to go back to the breakout room. So I
You're in the breakout room, I think.
No, I think you left the breakout room to
I
come
did. I did.
out here. Let me,
So-
yes, let me see if I can get, I'm going to reclaim host and see if I can put you back in.
Okay. Well,
So let's see, you
I can
need-
put myself back in the room. I just leave the screen, but you're saying I can access these questions in the breakout room.
You should be able to.
Okay.
That, well, if you left earlier, oh, okay, so maybe did you leave did you leave right away to go to the breakout room? That might be what happened. Let
I
me paste
left
these.
before I started talking to you.
Yeah, okay, hang on a second here. So let me find you. Here. Do you see them in your chat?
E-
Yeah, mommy, this flashing orange thing.
Yes. So,
And those will follow you now. When you go back into your room,
okay.
they will come with you. Your chat will follow you.
Do you think the other participants in the room can see the questions also?
It depends on if they left, like I gave the prompts verbally, and while I was giving them verbally, but some people immediately jumped over and saw the prompt and just jumped into the room. So if they jumped too soon into the room, they might not have had the prompt, but now you have it, and you
All
can
right.
copy and paste it and share it with all of them.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Of course. Are
All
you
right.
able to get back in the room though? That's the only thing.
Yes. Yes.
Okay,
I have
great.
gone back and forth several times.
Great. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you.
This is
And
interesting.
when
This-
at my school, they have to send you a prompt,
Yeah.
a little pop-up window.
To like go back in, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I if you know how to get back in, I'm going to be very surprised because I here. But you know what?
You-
I can. What room were you in? 7?
7. Yeah.
She found a
I
button. She found.
Let me see. There she goes. Perfect.
Hi, Vanessa.
Hey, who's that? Sandy?
Yeah,
How's it going?
it's going okay.
It's a little
At one
harrowing.
point, I was able to see breakout rooms and send a message to everybody, and now I'm not sure.
Oh, it's because I had to take over hosting because somebody popped out and she was having trouble, and so I had to reclaim host.
Oh, okay.
You should
Well,
feel
then,
free
no,
to
you-
reclaim it back if you
Please
want.
continue in the driver's seat. You have a steady hand on the wheel. That's fine.
And I would not qualify it as steady, but white knuckled. My oh, were you in a breakout room though? I thought you were.
I was chatting with Mary Kay.
Oh, how is she doing?
She's doing great.
Good. Good. Yeah, I was sort of, by the time I got my act together, I was like, well, now it's like halfway through and I don't want to like dive bomb a
Oh,
breakout.
you
So I
can.
think
It's really fun.
you think I should?
It's up to you.
I think I'm actually gonna, I think I'm gonna just go here. I'm gonna, how do I make you host? Co-host. I think you have to reclaim host.
Yeah.
Me more. And I think it's under participants.
Yeah.
Okay, Megan is asking for help in room 24. All right, never mind. Let me go help her.
Okay. Mm. Mm.
I think we're in that awkward moment of reconvening.
Hi.
Hey there.
Hmm.
Okay, looks like they're folding us back in.
Yeah, there we come.
Yep.
Sandy, did you take back control?
No, I did not.
Okay.
You still have it.
All right. Breakout rooms. Okay, I gave them all a 1 minute announcement, but if I close rooms, does that then give them another minute?
Yeah, they will have a little
Do you remember?
box, I think,
It
that says
does,
they're
right?
returning
It says
to the
60
main.
seconds. Okay. All right. So I've just done that.
Oh, yeah, that's the perfect thing.
Okie dokie. Hi, Sue. I haven't seen you in years.
I know. It's so exciting to see you here facilitating, Vanessa.
Thank you. Fantastic. Sue and I worked on a project together years ago. Are you still working on that project?
You betcha.
Awesome.
And all of our formative videos were created by this amazing woman here, Vanessa Warheit. So thank you for that.
Of course, that was a fun project. I'm really glad it's still going. Actually, I think I saw Sandy on the call somewhere. Sandy, I mean, yeah, Sandra.
Sandra was on the call. She has a meeting with her communities at 5, so she had to step away. She was very disappointed to have to step away. That they were scheduled at the same.
Yeah, well, I'm glad she got to join us for a little bit. All right, so
do you mean that was Sandy Slater?
Yeah.
Sandra, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So folks, welcome back. And one thing I want to remind you all of, if you were having a conversation in your chat with somebody that you were like, we should continue this, like, feel free to use the chat to share your contact information with each other. We're all about cross-pollination. And then just, I will give you a moment before we end the webinar for you to save your chat. If it's a private thing back and forth, nobody else will see it. But then we won't be able to capture it. So the only thing we'll be capturing in the recording is the public chat to everyone that was in the main channel. So is there anybody, I'm going to, you're all incredibly well behaved, by the way, but I'm going to mute you all and then ask you maybe to just unmute yourself and say, if you'd like to report back something from your conversation that you thought was meaningful or insightful, or something that you'd like to share, or a question. If you've got a question for Dan, please put it in the chat right now in case he's still capturing those. Anyone want to report back?
I think one thing people reported back in my group is being concerned how the economic crisis and the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic is going to affect work on climate change. If the pandemic will take priority, and any economic stimulus that isn't climate friendly will take priority.
Right.
So this is, of course, a huge question. I won't do justice to the answer because it's just so big, but we're already seeing those negative features. As much good as there is in the stimulus package passed this week, we also saw bailouts for industries that are polluting. Obviously, it was mentioned in the introduction by Vanessa, the degree to which the EPA used the crisis to roll back even the most basic of its mandated functions. China has already said that to get people back to work in China, they will accelerate coal, even though overall China had been on a path quite strongly decarbonizing out of coal. And so we are definitely seeing people taking advantage of the crisis. But on the other hand, I mean, I would say the positive side is that if there is any silver lining to this, we're learning in a way that the science of climate change, the work with the intergovernmental groups, was unable to do. And my community failed to make the climate crisis a social movement for decades after decades. And really, you know, young people, the Fridays for Future, the Greta Thunberg communities, there's been a real push, and the COVID dialogue has had really critical elements of that. The cartoon that has swept the UK today, I guess there is no more UK, that has swept the British Isles today is a couple standing looking out, and one of them says to the other, what's going to change after COVID? And the other one says everything. And if we take any real action from it, it's that we're all incredibly tightly connected in ways that we didn't recognize before, and that we need to act. And so Naomi Klein and I are writing a piece right now that's about these salient moments, and can you learn and not make a change but then relax back. And so I'm hoping that is the lesson, that we recognize that we are much more fragile than we thought. And that just like you saw in Vanessa's early data on the weakness of fossil fuel stocks relative to essentially everything else, that those are not good long-term investments. That doesn't mean that industry won't hang on. I mean, there are people who made not billions, but trillions in that industry. And so it will be hard. But to my mind, that would be the best answer to your really sort of deep question.
This is David Pollock. I'm in Portland, Oregon. I'm a psychiatrist. And I think there's a thing about the economic downturn that we could take advantage of or capitalize on, and that is the fact that there's been such a reduction in fossil fuel use. And to demonstrate that, hey, we didn't completely fall apart when this happened, and maybe we don't have to go back to the previous normal when we recover.
So I love that. That is quite a West Coast perspective, though, because the unemployment numbers, the drop off in jobs in the fossil industry elsewhere are strong. I was just in Pennsylvania, actually, when we wrote the green stimulus at University of Pennsylvania with people from a state where fracking and fracking money really controls the legislature. And the narrative there is very different. And of course, Pennsylvania is an absolutely critical state in the election. And so I agree with you completely. Oregon, of course, had a walkout of Republican members of the legislature to avoid having to vote on a carbon price until your governor took a bold step. We need more of those bold steps. But I do worry that the message that we can do without isn't as strong as the message of we do need to invest in new clean energy efficiency, and that's where we should be putting the recovery dollars. And certainly families need the bailout. Unfortunately, $1,200 is not the monthly budget for essentially anybody. And so if we don't do the next stimulus package that's truly a green investment, then we will have bought a few weeks and then we are back to where we were, unless this mindset shift also happens.
And this is Jane. I just want to say two things. One is, this is all the more reason, I think, for us to be clear about the election coming up and get, do whatever we can to help, communities whose vote is suppressed, and everything we can think of to get the right leadership in place. And so I don't want to overlook that. Yeah. And also in my little group, we talked about how do you get this next level of legislation that they might pass to have more teeth in it in terms of what can't be just given away to the big businesses and so forth. What's the mechanism for that?
So this is a tough one. I mean, there's a bunch of pieces that are critical to doing that. One of them certainly is looking for candidates that are pro climate. And the other one very strongly is recognizing where the money comes from. And states that have not invested in clean energy really have an opportunity now to do so.
Mm-hmm. So we have a bunch of questions have been coming in, and actually, Casey, can you unmute yourself and maybe start reading some of those questions that you've been capturing?
Thank you.
Yeah, so I have a question. It's kind of a combined one from Joni and Sarah Greenwald. Can you tell us anything about the relationship of climate change to academics in general, even if COVID-19 might not be an example necessarily?
And I missed, can you say it again? I missed one thing you said in the beginning there, the connection to?
The relationship between climate change and epidemics in general, although COVID-19.
Okay. Yeah, no, got it. So yeah, this is an absolutely key feature. We know very clearly that part of the weakness of our ecological system goes very much from the deforestation, not just on the climate basis, but for palm oil and what we're seeing in Brazil and Borneo. And so there's no question that the vulnerability to these types of crises is made far worse by our basically not having, if you will, a social cost of carbon, by not understanding the full impacts. And so one of the areas that all the epidemiological models point very clearly is the more we weaken the ecological system on the planet, the more we can expect events like this to happen more and more often.
Thank you. We had a few of those kinds of questions, but I think that was a good, succinct answer. Another question we have is, what do you think the post-COVID economy is going to look like, and how can we make sure that it develops in a way that is fair and compassionate and not fascist? From Janet Cox.
So I'm gonna cheat on this question. I'm gonna say what I want it to be, not what I think it will be, because I'm going to stay with the positive energy of the questions here. And so the green stimulus, and I just posted the link to it. It's on the website. It's been covered pretty extensively in the press. A number of legislators, Democrat and Republican, House and Senate, are working on pieces of it. But we see opportunity after opportunity to invest differently. Essentially, we got as far as we did so far in building the basis of a green economy by making green technology available to the affluent, by giving solar panel rebates to those who already owned a roof, to giving a rebate on electric vehicles or smart windows for people who already had resources. And there's an economic argument that people with money can buy things, and when these technologies were expensive, you can justify it. But you don't get a movement that way. You don't get everyone included that way. You don't ultimately get the kind of buy-in in the hard steps needed. And so everything from making electric vehicles an opportunity for low-income people, and we have some battles on that front. The ride-share story with Uber and Lyft is interesting because India has already required that a certain fraction of all ride-share vehicles must be electric. So an opportunity in the US is to say, let's make EVs available for the low-income drivers. California already buys EVs, subsidizes EVs, and so we could do that in a way that there's an opportunity to build that partnership. And of course, the rideshare companies are pushing back. They don't want to make their drivers employees. Well, this is a point of negotiation. You could push, we need you to recognize them as employees, and what we'll give you and them is an opportunity for those drivers to have access to EVs. That's a win, 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 and it's one of the many examples of doing this. Instead of using FICO scores to be predatory for Latin American, for Latino and African American, Native American people trying to buy property, we could use FICO scores as a way to rate homes and give benefits for green investment. So there are lots of things that are built into this green stimulus that all speak to really broadening the connection of the movement. So, we'll talk about that on the call next week, on a week from today, this Solve Climate by 2030. But I really think that digging through these opportunities is the most exciting opportunity here, because we've learned a lot in the last decade.
Our next question is, could you say more about what was most persuasive to get the UC system to divest?
Well, it was slow. I mean, Jeremy Eddy, I see, is on this call right here. He's one of the graduates of our program. He was here in the early days when I was surprised, even in California, the number of people who said, you shouldn't push to divest because all you're doing is you're exiting the tent and you're making fossil fuels cheaper. And I don't hear that argument much anymore. I never believed it, but what I've seen since then is a recognition of what side of history do you want to be on. And I would say that lesson, but even in the UC system, I mean, I put up the numbers for the vote of faculty on UC Berkeley. We still had 81 faculty that voted not to push to divest. And so in a place that the rest of the country calls liberal beyond belief, it is not even a slam dunk here. I mean, it was a super strong majority, but those battles are still going on.
Then here's a question from Nick. Stock markets have lost enormous value in the last weeks. Many investors are selling off. When they start reinvesting, Can you name factors that may prompt them to reallocate their money to renewables rather than fossil fuels?
BlackRock. $18 trillion just said on paper that they are going to switch their strategy. And every single fund in the country that we talk about, the funds at all of these large and small, the boutique and the non-boutique places, take a big signal from the 18 trillion that BlackRock manages. And if they come out of this and they say, we're going to get even more aggressive, that's the kind of thing that can tip a stock market. And no question, watching universities and individual industries say they're going to switch over makes a big difference. The Goldman family said they were divesting several years ago. Those really do tip the story because they give other investors confidence that's a place to go. And so definitely moving one's individual money, and I think very clearly that moving one's own money into green funds is good for your own individual portfolio because those are the ones that are less volatile, less risky, better performing, as Vanessa said in the beginning. But I do think that the BlackRock move, if it's really going to be pushed to its extreme, is the kind of thing that can really tip that story.
We have a question from David Cole. How do we get governments to make better science-based decisions?
Elect different leaders.
I think you just heard the answer. And it's not just in state. I mean, for example, I have a student who she decided to leave the PhD program because she was so upset about the mountaintopping in West Virginia. She moved to West Virginia. She is now running for Congress there. Her name is Kathy Kunkel. She's an example of one of those down ticket candidates that no matter what happens at the top, people in California often feel like things are pretty clear here, but investing in green candidates out of state makes a massive difference because so many people come to California and New York to raise money that finding those candidates out of our region really does change the story. And those high quality candidates, they bring in the best, the best science advisors, the best technical people, as opposed to, unfortunately, what you're seeing now. And someone asked that question early on of those people in the Trump administration. How many do I think are actually industry cronies? Well, I don't have to go very far. The head of the EPA is an industry crony. And so that's a bad start.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. And we have one, where'd it go? Sorry, 1 second. TIA-CREF is a terrible fund that all us academics are forced into. Even their social responsibility fund gets a C or D rating. Can academics organize to force TIA-CREF to divest?
So of the academics on the call, and I see a couple, that's right. They are a natural target, and they're one that academics should have been more aggressive on, but the more help they get from outside, the TIA-CREF funds are definitely ones that clearly should have moved this way. I hope BlackRock will be a push for them, but it's definitely, it's a great question.
And for the person who posed that question, I would encourage you to reach out to us because I don't know what university or college you're with, but we know other folks, like for instance in the state university system, who are working on getting their pension divested, and TIA-CREF is also the same crappy investment vehicle offered for 529s around the state for people who want to educate their kids and save for their kids' education. So we've been working with As You Sow. They're aware of this, and we've been talking back channels about maybe getting that 529 change. So come talk to us. You can contact us through contact at fossilfreecalifornia, fossilfreeca.org, and we'd like to talk to you.
And this is Jane. I just want to say that there's a little movement at Stanford to try to get better choices for employees, getting to the right people who are making those decisions. If enough people are giving them some feedback in a respectful way, it may help turn that tide a little bit.
And this is Janet Cox from 350 Silicon Valley. We're very interested in also working on TIAA with at Stanford, and it seemed to me that if we could get a TIAA campaign going at Stanford and at Harvard, which are the two biggest, fanciest universities with the most flamboyantly failed divestment campaigns, we could really get some professors and some faculty and staff on the line. So maybe after this call and do some strategizing about TIAA. The Sunrise Project, which has its finance arm in Oakland, is also very interested in this.
Yeah. In fact, Harvard is voting on its new trustees. So a number of us organized a campaign to get a series of really strong, positive, pro-divest candidates. The voting is underway until the 6th. And so those of you who have a tie there, let yourself or your friends take a look at that ballot.
I think they just extended or postponed
the COVID extension happened, yeah.
Is the 6th the new deadline or the old deadline?
Old deadline, I think.
Okay.
So our last question is going to be from Robert Gerling. The feed-in tariff was critical for Germany's success in moving towards solar and wind. Is there any hope for feed-in tariffs in California?
So this is both a fundamental and a super detailed nerdy question. It's perfect on both fronts. Basically, the graph I showed for California with that green moving up the state is because we don't have a feed-in tariff. We have a mandate on the utilities, the so-called renewable portfolio standard, 60% green power by 2030. In Europe and in some parts of Latin America, they use a feed-in tariff, which is a specific financial adder that you put on top of what the tariff would be. The challenge in the feed-in tariff is that everybody pays it and it goes into this fund that gets given to the people who are generating power with clean energy. And so it's got a good feature, it subsidizes what you want, but it has a challenge that it's also not socially just because everyone pays in and the people that get it are in general the more affluent because you have to own a home or own a utility to go there. And while I love feed-in tariffs, they were, in my view, a creature we critically needed when renewables were more expensive than fossil fuels. Today, we don't need it. Renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels. The problem is that's a narrow view because the solar panel is cheaper, but you don't get large solar unless you also build transmission lines. And so it's an infrastructure, it's a systems perspective that is really needed. In California, we're doing really well. We don't let builders build fossil. We let them look at efficiency first and then renewables. And the challenge is for us to work with other neighboring states. Washington and Oregon have done some things, but not enough. Neither one has a carbon price, even though Washington has now passed the same thing we have, 100% clean energy standard for 2045. But all of our neighboring states need to push this way. And so the friends, relatives, lawmakers, in our neighboring states are really critical because as far as California can go, we are physically tied into a Western regional trading bloc. And the low-cost wind is in Montana and Wyoming and Colorado. So we really need to work with our partners, both politically, but also on a business basis. And so I would say that while I love feed-in tariffs, we're at a point where the next thing is what we really call regional integration, regional cooperation to build, a clean energy market that will sort of dominate what goes on, not just the Western US, but same things elsewhere. And that's why I showed you the California price of carbon, but then the much, much lower price in New England. And now we're seeing Pennsylvania is considering pulling out of that market because of some shenanigans in the dealing. So these regional partnerships are really key.
Wow, thank you. So Casey, do you want to, I'm just mindful of the time. We only got a couple minutes left. Can you close us out?
Yeah, can you put up the slides, please?
Oh, yes. Stand by.
Will we be able to have all this chat, Vanessa? the whole list
Yes,
chat?
yes. What you'll need to do is go down and can somebody talk her through how to save that?
Go down in the more part of your chat in the bottom right-hand corner. There's a little down arrow and it says save. Save chat.
There's a down arrow.
It's the 3 dots in the bottom right-hand corner.
Mine, it's an arrow.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it, but I don't want to. Oh, wait a minute. Yes, I do. I see it. Save chat.
Yay.
Thank you.
Awesome.
And that's to save your little group chat, but the main chat will be saved.
Look. All right. Can you see that?
Yep.
Go for it.
All right. So thanks so much for coming. This is our first webinar. If you're interested in hearing more about our work, a great way to do that is to follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. If you want to help us produce content for that, you can also join our communications team. Other ways to get involved, if you want to check out the full list, please go to the link on the screen. But our communications team, in addition to social media, we have opportunities to get involved in creating our newsletter, blog posts, website, traditional media, and press outreach. We do videos and other kinds of digital outreach. If you're interested in campaigning and hold personal stake in CalPERS, STIRS, or moving your own money, we encourage you to get involved with our campaigns. If you're interested in learning about the California legislative process, especially when it comes to environmental friendly bills, you can join our legislation team. If you want to help us build our capacity and organization and are interested in helping us fundraise, you could do that. If you have previous tech support and administration skills, we'd love to have you help us out with that as well. Again, just go to that link up there to learn more. If you would rather donate financially, we love that. We're a really small, efficient team, and we do really high leverage things. So please feel free to donate, especially in these trying times if you can. We do this work year round, so becoming a monthly donor really helps us work 365 days.
It feels like.
Yep. And if you want to stay connected with us, the best way by far to do that is to join Slack with us. It is a digital workspace where we share resources, information, connect with our passion, and you stay involved with our campaigns. And it makes it so you don't have to get as much emails. So if you would like to join us there, the link is on the screen. Next slide. So we plan to have another webinar for the last Tuesday of every month for the time being, because we are moving to more online forms of communicating. So mark your calendar for the dates on the screen. If there are feedback, if you have feedback for this forum, ideas on what you'd like for us to include in the future, or speakers you think would be interested in joining us, please send an email to what's on the screen or join us on Slack. And that is all from me. Again, thank you so much. We'll save that chat and send out a video of this webinar.
Thank you so much, Casey. Thank you. Is Dan still there?
Yes, I am. Thank you all.
Dan, I have a quick question I want to ask you, so I'm going to call you when we're done here. But I just want to give you a round of applause. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
And thank you to the 67 of you that hung in there till the bitter end. It's a delight. And please join us. Like as Casey said, the last Tuesday of the month now is our virtual gathering time. And we do hope that you'll join us on Slack. We're going to be posting everybody who attended today or signed up to attend. There were a lot of people who signed up who couldn't attend. We'll get an email with a link go back in, and we hope you will join us online in one of the many virtual options we have. So thank you all again. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If you want to save your chat.
Bye.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dan, since you're still on, is Martha still on? Maybe she got off. Dan, can you hear me?
Very well.
Martha, who was on, and Robert Gerling, who gave you the question about feed-in tariffs, are really interested in talking with you. They are putting together a possible reinvestment forum next year.
Fantastic.
And would really like to have a chit chat with you about that. So should I maybe make an email introduction? Is that the...
That'd be great. Yeah, I'd love it. I mean, I think it's the critical time to be doing these things because as we talked about, there really is a chance now to make this conversation, you know, one that now gets into action. So yeah, I'd love to have that conversation.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. I will follow up with an email introduction. I'll do that right now before I forget.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to close out this call. I hope everyone's had a chance to download their chat. Actually, I guess I should download the chat myself. Save chat. Chat saved. Oops, one new message. Hoping to get a transcript or other info by mail. Investment through faith communities. Okay, save chat. There we go. All right. Thank you again, Dan.
Thank you.
See
Really
you out in the ether.
Okay. Yeah, I'll post the slides in about 20 minutes. I just have to make it a smaller file. I'll put it on my website.
Oh, great. Oh, okay.
Right on. There's an announcement for this session, and I'll just put it in a link. You have to go into that. So you have to go to today's event on our calendar, but I'll send it out.
Okay, so you'll send us.
I'll send you where it's going to be. Within the next 10 minutes, you can post it to the group if you want. You can download all the slides.
Okay, we'll include that when we send the email out to everybody to follow up tomorrow. Perfect. And can you include Casey in that, Casey at fossilfreeca.org as well as me?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you. All righty. Bye, everyone. Thank you again.
Bye-bye. Thank you all.